coming in from the waiting room, but I want to make good use of Elizabeth's time. Um, we are talking about communicating inclusively today, and Elizabeth Snively is joining us and leading the conversation. She's the Director of Communications for NC State's Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, OIED, which oversees diversity, equality, or equity and inclusion initiatives serving the university. Elizabeth leads OIED's communication team, which publishes the Diversity Digest biweekly newsletter, manages OIED's web presence and social channels, and creates digital and print publications. Elizabeth has a BA degree in English and design from Stanford University. She's currently pursuing a Master's of Art in Digital Communications at UNC Chapel Hill. Thanks so much for joining us, Elizabeth. And the show is now yours.
Thank you, Janine, for inviting me, and thanks to everyone for devoting an hour of your morning. Um, let's see. The last time I did one of these and we all went around and introduced ourselves, that ate up so much time. So what I'm going to ask you to do instead is if you could type your role in the chat. I'm going to record this so that I can connect with everyone later. Actually, I don't have permission to record. Janine, can you record it? Oh, it is recording. Okay, thank you. Yeah, if people have the ability to type their role, their position in the chat, then I'll know who you are and how much you need to know this type of material in your work. Although I would argue that everyone probably needs to know it. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, thank you very much, share my screen. And it used to be that we would give this type of presentation and it's like you're teaching someone to cook and you're getting into blanching and making a roux and all this stuff. And then you realize you haven't taught people how to turn on the oven. I don't think that's the case anymore because most people are very much aware of the need to communicate inclusively. So I tried to pick some topics that would be interesting to someone who's totally immersed in doing this all the time or someone who's fairly new to thinking about it. I am on LinkedIn, so if you want to connect with me, please do. And I always like to get some, oh, by the way, I'd like to treat this casually, so if something occurs to you, feel free to interrupt me. If I forget to say something, some of you have more expertise than I do, so please feel free to interject. I don't mind that at all. I come from a family where we interrupt each other a lot, and I enjoy the give and take. I like to give some context as to who I am and where I am on campus. So the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity is located in 3 places on campus, and I miss them all. Winslow Hall, which is right next to Holiday Hall by the bell tower, that's where we have our equal opportunity and equity, inclusive excellence and strategic practice, our vice provost office, and communications, of course. Over here on the right is Witherspoon Student Center, which is on Cates Avenue. That's where the African American Cultural Center is located, which is one of 2 buildings on campus named for an African American. It's named for Dr. Gus Witherspoon, who was the second Black person to earn a doctorate and the first Black professor at NC State. He also went on to serve as Associate Dean and then Associate Provost of African American Affairs, which is now part of Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity. It's actually Inclusive Excellence and Strategic Practice. There's also a scholarship that's awarded annually in his name to graduate students. Of course, you recognize Tally. That's where we have our 4 campus community centers. Multicultural Student Affairs is up on 4th. GLBT Center and Women's Center are up on 5th. And our Bias Impact Response Unit is up on 5th as well. And that's headed up by Adrian Davis. Let's see here. you might not be able to see this, but I'm a very analytical person. Whenever I meet someone in a new department, I just want to know the structure of that department. So here's our org chart. It's also on our website. You can see my team is pretty small. We have two other communication specialists and two interns usually. So we're kind of like a lot of the smaller offices, we run our own little small shop, and then we contract out for some of our communications needs. So here is our website, and I encourage you to visit that. Subscribe to the Diversity Digest if you haven't already. Follow us on social. We look forward to connecting with you if we haven't already. So first of all, I am in a master's program right now with Jen Heiss, who's in your area, at Chapel Hill, Master's in Digital Communication. And I took a InfoViz class last semester, and I did this project that shows our demographic breakdown of the UNC schools, the colleges, 16 colleges. So you can see that NC State is one of the least diverse universities in the system. So that is my answer to the question, why do we need to be more inclusive? The bottom line is, as a state institution, we should be representing the population of the state, in my opinion. And as an individual institution, we're not actually doing it that well. And then, of course, there's lots of other arguments for why we should be inclusive. Some people say it's the moral imperative. Some people say business reasons. Some people say it's in order to attract the best and brightest, we need to be inclusive. So many reasons. So that's not actually my job to convince everybody, because my job is just to tell you how to communicate inclusively. But I always like to start with the big why. So let's see here. My own personal history is I started off as a web designer for the office. So I didn't really have any particular expertise in diversity and inclusion. But this is the office that I came to, and so I got immersed in the whole subject matter. And then when I moved to a more general communications role, I started taking some of our workshops so that I would be able to write about them. I'm sure a lot of you can identify with that, just wanting to develop your subject matter expertise. So there I was taking our National Coalition Building Institute workshop, Building Bridges, which still exists. And if you are interested in taking some workshops, I recommend that one. Some people say it's life-changing. I took it over 10 years ago, and I still to this day remember some of the personal stories that I heard in the class that really, really affected me and opened my eyes to the variety of experiences that are out there. And the injustices around those. So they didn't use the term woke back then, but I definitely was not woke. But after a while, I took more workshops and started to develop a little bit. And one of the things in that workshop was in the certificate program, was something called the Diversity Awareness Profile. And so I took that. It was the first thing we did in the certificate. And I thought I was pretty progressive, but my profile result was somewhere between an avoider and a change agent. So my eyes were kind of open to the fact that I wasn't actually part of the solution, and so I was kind of part of the problem. I'm an introvert, so I wasn't someone who would see something unfair and say something or step in. I'd like to think that I'm better now and that I would do those things. But this was like the first step of my journey towards awareness. And what we learned was that to help change the system, you actually want to be more towards being a fighter. And to me, that seemed so against who I am as a person. But then I realized there are many different ways to be a fighter. And as a communicator, um, we use the power of our words and images. And so that is how we evoke change. And so that is the argument that I have today for why you need to be an inclusive communicator. Did anyone want to say something at this point about their personal journeys, or how they became a little bit more inclusive? It's Zoom syndrome. And no one wants to say anything. That's totally fine. Um, I'll just insert a tiny anecdote here. My husband is a teacher, and so my daughter is a high school student, and no one turns their screen on except her because she knows how it feels on the other side. But anyway, so I appreciate.
Elizabeth, I'll participate and hope to include entice other people to participate.
Okay.
Um, like, in recent, I guess, in the past 6 months, I'm working hard to become uncomfortable um, in terms of speaking up, even when I know it may create other drama or I may say something wrong. I'm not necessarily doing a great job at speaking up in those situations because it makes me uncomfortable. But to make sure that I'm using my privilege in a way that is beneficial to the group. But I've always found myself to be a fighter, but fighting or joining the group in speaking out is one thing, but speaking out individually is different and uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Thank you very much for sharing that. Um, and I also wanted to mention that every year my office has brings in a speaker for the annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. And last year we were fortunate enough to bring in Ibram Kendi, and we had pretty much a full house. So I'm guessing some of you were there. And his recent book was How to Be an Anti-Racist. And that kind of follows along with the premise that I was talking about earlier, in that it's not enough to just be not racist, because by not doing anything, even if you're not doing any harm, you're also you're not really changing anything. And so systems get perpetuated when people don't do things. So to be, you have to be an anti-racist to work against systems of inequity. So that kind of follows along with that theme. Anyway, so today's topics, I just picked 7 topics. And since I do this all the time, I'm hoping that these are useful for everyone. Representation, people first language, writing about diverse communities, sensitivity to historical harms, gender diversity and pronouns, evolution of language, and then cultural humility. So, and I'll definitely make these slides available if you want to take a look at them later on. So first of all, representation. As a communicator, put your work through the audience test. And there's the concept of lenses. It's super hard sometimes to look through other people's lenses, especially if you're in the majority viewpoint. There was a seminal inclusion and anti-inequity piece called The Invisible Knapsack, written by Peggy McIntosh, I think in 1982. She was an educator and activist, and diversity practitioners feel like it's overused at this point, but it's a really still, I think, a really great introduction to what is privilege. It was just a series of, I think, 20 statements to help people recognize what privilege was, unpacking the white knapsack, so specifically talking about white privilege. And the one that really made me understand was the statement, I can buy a Band-Aid that matches my skin tone. And being someone who's actually kind of tan, I always noticed that Band-Aids didn't even match my skin tone. But imagine if you're very dark skinned and you're buying a peach colored Band-Aid. I mean, what kind of sense does that even make? And yet the majority of people would buy Band-Aids, put them on, and not even notice that. So whoever designed those Band-Aids did not look through the lens of someone with a different skin tone. And so it's so useful. Like, let's say you've written a piece and then you reread it and you try to look at it through other lenses. Would someone different from you see themselves reflected in this? And so you want to look at, if you're doing storytelling, you want to look at names, voices, descriptions, images, experiences, and just try to infuse variety. I see that happening a lot in major media sources where people will use different pronouns. It used to be that you would automatically default to he. You would choose a name like John Doe, but now you might, often you see she, and you see a variety of names being used. So that just reminds people that we're a diverse society, and it helps us internalize the fact that there's, multiple viewpoints out there. However, you don't want to overdo it. You want to be authentic. If you're a 90% white institution, you don't want to choose all of your examples to be, Latino. People will see through that and it won't seem authentic. So that can really backfire on you. So we have some examples of what not to do here. Let's see if this link will work. One of the earliest ones was, I think it was in Michigan or Wisconsin, where you might not notice it at first, but there's a student here, a Black student, who noticed himself photoshopped into the cover of the magazine. And he had never attended a football game, and so he ended up bringing a lawsuit against the university. And of course, it hit the major media sources, and it was a real embarrassment to the university. So that is not something you want to do. And I've got another example here that I won't, in the interest of time, I won't click on it, but you can click on it later. But oops. Let me go back here for a second. We have an example right here at NC State that we call Library Girl. In 2013, University Communications got some photo releases and took some fantastic pictures of students, one of which was this student here. People loved this picture and they started using it a lot, to the point where she graduated ages ago, 7 years now, and she actually contacted us and say, can you retire that picture because it just keeps showing up in everything. I did ask UComm to update their photo assets, but yesterday when I was preparing these slides, I saw it was still out there. So one rule of thumb for those of you who are designers or using photos, take a look at the date in the NC State Photos repository and try to pick the newer photos, because although there's nothing inherently wrong with using it because we got her photo release, if she's noticing it, probably other people are noticing that we're starting to use the same photos over and over, and it just really starts to look inauthentic. I've got a few random pictures dropped into my slides just to keep it interesting, and this one is from 1887 Bistro, and the reason I put it in here is because a friend of mine who runs the dining services, Sean Hoke, he did an amazing thing. He noticed that some of the servers were not being treated very well. We can speculate as to why. They're mostly non-white grad students. And so he decided that he would make new name tags for them, and he would put not only their name, but their graduate program under their name. Because a lot of them are just amazing engineering grad students. And it's amazing how making that change changed how people treated the wait staff, which is sad, but it is a commentary on reality. And it made people realize these are, people worthy of respect. That's just a random observation of how it's important to look through other lenses, and little prompts like that can help people look through those lenses. That's my comments on representation. Just make sure that you are doing it. Let's see. Next topic is people first language. You may not know that NC State has 10 protected classes: age, disability, gender identity, genetic information, national origin, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, and veteran status. At one time or another, we all fall under one or more of these categories. Um, a protected class means that we have either a policy, a state law, or a federal law that has protections for people who are members of these groups. However, um, most people belong to more than one group. And so it's really not good to just identify people by their group. Um, so that's just something to be aware of as you're communicating, to try not to refer to people as one particular group membership. And of particular importance is persons with disabilities. And the term people first language refers to the fact that you should say a person with a disability rather than a disabled person. Um, there are some exceptions depending on context. For instance, if you are in a context where you are talking about race, you might say a white person or a black person, but just keep your ears open for the context, and don't unnecessarily label a person if you really don't need to. And for instance, if someone has just won a major prize for being a biomedical researcher, that's probably more important than the fact that they're, of membership in a certain group. Let's see some examples. There's some great links here of, certain terms to avoid. I won't click on those right now, but you will have this. We don't use the word handicapped anymore. We try to definitely avoid negative connotations such as suffers from or confined to. Just stick to the simple statements such as certain person has a disability or uses a wheelchair. And also note that mental illness is a health issue. It's not a negative characteristic. I'm sure most people know that already. But sometimes ways of talking kind of come out when we're not, specifically concentrating on it. Anyone have comments on either representation or people first language? Okay, next is writing about diverse communities. So with our best intentions, we definitely want to start incorporating a variety of viewpoints into our work, but most of us only know our own experience intimately. So how do you do this without messing up? I mean, fear is drives a lot of our hesitation around this whole topic. And especially if you are a communicator and you're sending things out to lots and lots of people, you don't want to take unnecessary risks and make a big mistake. So my remedy for this is to find someone you can trust to be a reviewer for you. And if it's a high profile piece, I recommend, more than one. And I am fortunate to work in the office where there's just a handful of people who have majority identities. So there are plenty, I can step on when I'm on campus, that is, I can step right outside my office and say, hey, can you read this? Am I forgetting something? Did I phrase something incorrectly? You cannot overestimate the value of having a reviewer like that. So time to make some friends with different identities and rely on them to help you out. Let's see. And when in doubt, always use a respectful tone and do your research. Let's see here. So what not to do? Cultural appropriation is something that admittedly I don't totally understand sometimes. I myself am biracial. My father was Asian and my mom Jewish. They're also different religions. And so I think there was actually a lot of cultural appropriation going on in my house. So at first, when I heard about the term, I thought, is it really a bad thing? Because we sample different cuisines, we learn how to cook them, we collect clothing from other cultures, we admire other cultures. So there is a really fine line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And I have learned that the difference is if harm or detriment to the culture that you are borrowing results, then that's cultural appropriation. For instance, someone who opens a restaurant that provides a certain cuisine, but it's not authentic, and it might end up harming, authentic restaurants run by people who have a history of knowing that culture and that cuisine. And it reminds me because my dad used to hate P.F. Chang's because his parents ran a Chinese restaurant. And he would always say, that's not Chinese food. But my sister and I would always say, but we like it and it's good. And so we compromised and we said, okay, it's not Chinese food, it's American Chinese food. And he'd say, okay, it's not real. But he still didn't like the fact that they were trying to pass it off as authentic Chinese food. But food is really the least of the harms compared to um, when you might um, accidentally denigrate someone's culture or religion or something, even more important than that. So be aware of that and always ask someone if you're in doubt. Um, and then there's an interesting essay that I include there for later on. Let's see here. Any questions about cultural appropriation versus appreciation? Or comments or stories? Okay, so the next one is sensitivity to historical harms. Um, Sometimes those of us who are communicators and who like to read, um, we might have a whole arsenal of expressions that we don't actually know where they came from, and then we're surprised when we find out, oh my gosh, that's where that really originated. Um, and so what my advice on this is to avoid cliches, idioms, and things like that, not only because sometimes they have historical meanings that you're not aware of, but also as we become more global as a society and we're translating our communications into different languages and we have people at different education levels, it just makes it easier to speak and write in a straightforward way without idiomatic usages. Um, and also related to this is to use the terminology that the group itself prefers. And sometimes it's not always clear. I grew up on the West Coast and we always said African American. And when I came to the South, I was a little taken aback that Black is the preferred term for a lot of people. And finally, my coworker Gary says, Elizabeth, you can just say Black. But for some reason, it was not as common to hear that when I was growing up on the West Coast. So it's just something you have to listen and watch and learn and get used to. And another one is Native, Indigenous, First Nations peoples rather than American Indian. But you'll see that some organizations still say American Indian. So you really need to follow the context you're in. And when in doubt, always ask. There are so many examples of that too. Let's see here. Just because it's super interesting, I'm going to click on this so we can see what some of those are. Let's see here. Basket case, hysterical, tipping point, low man on the totem pole, sold down the river. One of them that I just learned was grandfathered in. This is a term that we use a lot to refer to legislation or rights, privileges. You're grandfathered into something. In fact, some of you may have heard that anyone hired after January 1st will not be entitled to retiree health care. And so you might actually hear the phrase, anyone who was hired before that is grandfathered in. Well, that phrase actually talks to talks about your parentage and whether as a Black person you had a free ancestor or an enslaved ancestor. And when I just learned that, I'm like, oh gosh, I did not even realize that was the origin of that phrase. So, and then I also, my mom always used to use the word gyp for when you were taken advantage of financially. And that actually derives from a derogatory term used for gypsies. And I'm not even sure if gypsy itself is considered derogatory now for certain nomadic peoples from Eastern Europe, I think. Another one is drink the Kool-Aid. You hear that a lot, but actually refers to the Jamestown massacre that was a cult. Just a lot of these where it's kind of horrifying once you learn about them. So the key is just to speak in plain language to avoid any of those. A big one for me and for a lot of people is the holiday season. I think that most people who are from non-majority religious traditions do not actually mind for you to say Merry Christmas. That's kind of a false assumption. What they do mind is if you totally ignore the fact that they might have a different religious tradition. So if you say Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, that's more inclusive. Or if you just say Happy Holidays or whichever holidays you celebrate, I hope they're happy. Just remember that as you're putting out any departmental holiday communications, that you might want to think about the fact that we have a lot of people on campus who are not Christian. Any comments on, historical harms? All right, here's another random picture I put in. This is Dr. Lubischer, a professor, female.
Sorry, Elizabeth, to interrupt. Claudia said men are bosses and women are bossy. And then I said, and back to writing about all of this and your history as a web person, what are some of like alt text best practices relating to diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think all of you know that alt text is just a short descriptive phrase that you put on every image so that someone using an assistive device such as a screen reader will know what's in the image. So for like a picture like this, it would be woman professor with 2 female students or 2 women students. So yes, if in the context of what your content is about, that it is useful to know that the subjects of the picture belong to a certain group, then by all means do include that. But if it's just a random choice and it's not pertinent to your content, I don't think I would waste the person's time by including that extra information. So it's definitely a judgment call. If there's no reason to say that these are women, for instance, let's say it's an article about classroom renovations. I don't think that it would be necessary to say that they're women, a woman professor and women students. I would just say professor and students enjoying the new facilities or the new classroom in such and such a hall. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so I guess when I learned about it, it was more taking, if you were going to describe the picture for someone who was unable to see, what would you say? And so I always thought that meant, like, in this picture it would be a female student engaged in conversation with 2 female professors, um, and that would be fine. And then in some of the other pictures, it would be like Black male faculty member speaks in front of large group.
Yeah, I think if your content is general then it is useful to include that because you want to show that you have diverse individuals represented in the scene. I think that context is definitely important. And because I used to work in web a lot, I know that when you're using a screen reader, you definitely want to be able to get the meaning as quickly as possible without having to listen to a lot of extra verbiage. So also keep that in mind by keeping it to the point. Um, but definitely describing uh, diversity and being inclusive when that's helpful and useful. So good question. Thank you very much. Oh, the reason that I stuck this random picture in there is because the fall of 2018 was actually the first incoming first year NC State class that was majority female. I did not actually know that until I took a look at the numbers, and we are trending towards more female undergrads. Just thought that was an interesting bit of trivia about NC State.
That's odd. That it's slower than a lot of other state institutions. A lot of other institutions of higher ed have been majority female for the past couple of decades, 15, 20 years.
Yes, great observation. And one theory that I personally have about that is because our strengths are STEM, agriculture, vet school, engineering, sciences, and traditionally women have had a hard time achieving equity in those fields, but that is fortunately changing. Thank you for that. Okay, let's see here. Gender diversity in pronouns is really big right now. Some might even say that LGBTQ rights are the civil rights battles of our time. And a lot of things are happening, good things are happening. So you really need to keep your eye on this so that you can keep up to date. For instance, in 2017, Merriam-Webster added singular they to the dictionary. And I actually personally had a hard time getting used to this, not because of what it represents, but because I was an English major and my mom was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, and they were always hammering us the correct use of pronouns. And now to suddenly have a change to that, I'd like to say that I'm totally used to it now. But at first it's like, wait, they, I'm referring to a single person as they. And of course, the reason is because we have people who are not within the gender binary, and they is the pronoun that best describes their identity. And in fact, you will now see people introducing themselves with their gender pronouns. So I would say, my name's Elizabeth Snively. I use she, her pronouns. And in fact, my office, if you look at our staff directory, we have our preferred gender pronouns after everyone's name. And I think you're going to see this a lot because it makes a statement immediately that you're inclusive of all genders. When I find myself going to different places on campus and I'm the only one doing it, it feels awkward at first. But then after a while, I realize that that awkwardness is going to go away and that it's just going to be a matter of course. And you're hearing it more and more. And right away, it helps people to feel welcome, included, and accepted. So that is a small price to pay for a few extra seconds out of your day, in my opinion.
Elizabeth, what's the difference between the they and the Z?
Um, Before people seemed to standardize on they, there were a variety of different pronouns that people were trying out to figure out if it would flow better in speech and or be more eye-catching. So I think there was T, ter, tis, zeezer, ziz, zim. Um, there were a lot of them out there, but I think people are starting to standardize on they. Just because it's more familiar to people, it's not that much of a change from what we're used to. But you may still see some of those floating around. But now that some of the major style books have adopted the singular they, I think that's the one that people are standardizing on. It's good, also a good question.
So Elizabeth, I'll confess, I'm older, and when you spent 60 some years of your life with two basic concepts of gender identity, um, changing to the they them pronouns is tough. So is that something you ask people, or you just assume that you're using the right one until they correct you? What's the best way to handle it?
If you're at all unsure, definitely ask right off the bat. And inevitably, you're going to mess up. I've messed up many times. And the best thing to do is to say, I'm sorry, I use your incorrect pronouns, and then correct yourself. And sometimes that's even after the meeting as you're walking away. And then you go back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I used the wrong pronouns. I'll try to do better. But definitely to be upfront about it and ask. So, yeah, this was all just a very indirect concept to me until my nephew came out as trans last year. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's sort of like if those of you who have read John Irving's book, Prayer for Owen Meany, where everything makes sense in the end. I was having an Owen Meany moment. It's like all these years I've been figuring this out for this moment. And now I get it. So yeah, it is very, very important for the trans community. So it's tough to get used to, but if we go back to the concept of looking through other people's lenses, you'll realize that you are really being helpful to do that. And yeah, I admit it's confusing at first, but like everything, you get used to it. Another thing to remember is that privacy may be a big concern for LGBTQ individuals who may not be out due to safety or personal reasons. So if you are doing a content piece about this community, anyone from this community, make sure you obtain permission. That would be before using quotes, images, even if someone's in the background, or if they're in a group or in any published material or indirectly associated, just be very careful about that. Because we might be talking about someone's personal safety. So definitely don't assume that people are out. They may have been out to you. They may have been happy to talk about it in the context of their work, but they don't necessarily want certain things published. So definitely check about that. And I have a link here, Guide to Allyship, which just has some pretty good ways of being an ally to people in the community. Yeah, and it's all a journey for all of us. Let's see, any comments on gender diversity and pronouns? Any more comments?
Elizabeth, I have one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on a paper for a graduate class, and I'm trying to describe a board of directors at an HIV support group. It's a support organization. And the point of the paragraph is to extol their diversity, that there are males and females, there are people of different ethnic origins. Everyone has their pronouns under their picture on their website.
Great.
One person, their preferred pronoun is she, her, and it's a transsexual person of color. So I'm not sure how to properly, without going into all of this like I just did with you, to describe the diversity of that group, and not, in other words, if I'm breaking down the women, there are your X number of men and X number of women, and then do I say, and one transsexual person? It just seems, it doesn't seem right.
I believe the term transsexual is not preferred anymore, so I would shorten it to trans or transgender.
Okay.
But yes, if you're down to just one person, that seems like unfairly focusing on that person. So here's where you might have to get creative. You might, oftentimes I've seen that non-binary individuals are combined with women. So you could say 5 people identifying as men and 7 people identifying as women or non-binary.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. The first time I saw that, I thought, oh, that's good because there's so few trans people. It seems unfairly singling them out. And then I noticed that they were combined with women for a certain group. I'm not sure about why they were combined with the women. That's an interesting question. I think maybe you could even vary it. You could combine them with the men in one listing and women in other.
Okay, and I like using the word identifying too,
Yes.
because then that prefaces that this is a choice they made and I'm just transcribing what I'm reading. In
Yeah,
essence.
it may
Okay.
not be exactly a choice in who they are, but it's a choice in how they want to be identified.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I wonder if they just put they use the smaller group, like they said there were 7 men and 5 women and a non-binary, or whatever it was, how artfully you just said it was, but like, I wonder if they just use the smaller of the 2 groups to.
Yeah, that could be the case. Also because, you know, uh, women are often considered a marginalized group, and so they may have some things in common with non-binary individuals, or they may have certain similar needs. Um, this particular event that I was at was actually about interpersonal violence, and women and members of the LGBTQ community are both subject to more harms than men typically. So it kind of made sense to put them there. So it is very context sensitive, and for HIV research, it may make sense to put non-binary individuals together with men, uh, because depending on who is more susceptible to HIV infection. I don't know. I'm totally venturing into an area in which I have no expertise, but those would be some thoughts that some questions I would ask myself. Um, whether there are other characteristics of the group that would make sense to put them together.
And then
Well,
oh, Sharon, is this you talking? No, sorry.
mhm. Well, if the person identified with the pronouns she, her,
Mhm.
she would probably like to be combined with the women.
Good point.
That,
Absolutely.
that's what I ended up doing, but listening to the presentation this morning, I'm thinking, was that proper for me to make that jump? I guess, I could always just call up and ask.
Yes.
So
You will
that would be the most direct approach.
Yeah, you'll get lots of appreciation for asking, especially if you do it from a position of humility and just wanting to know and wanting to do the best thing.
Yes.
So good for you.
Okay, thanks again.
Yeah. Let's see here.
There was another question about keeping track or trying to understand what is the terms are preferred.
How to keep up with things?
Yes, I guess.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna be getting into that in the next 2 topics. Um, there's no easy answer to that one. um, okay, so evolution of language. So we have this concept of being culturally competent, but that's kind of a false premise because you can never be 100% culturally competent. You're always on the spectrum. You may be pretty good, but things are going to keep changing and you have to keep up with it. And so that also pertains to language. You have to always be a student of the language. So I recommend reading the news, um, joining your communications news groups, following major media outlets. NC State our style is based on AP style book. So if your department allows you to purchase a subscription to that and to get on their updates, you'll see that the most recent big thing that they changed was that Black is now capitalized with a capital B. Um, However, they have not yet capitalized white with a capital W, which is a little bit awkward. Um, I always try to capitalize Black, brown, and white when referring to people. But so far, AP style book only has Black capitalized. So that just happened last, or maybe it was even this past spring. So
Yeah, I think it happened in July.
yeah, it was very recent. So that's just to say that change is guaranteed. And the question I'm asking myself now is, do we go back and change past articles? And I think we've concluded that we don't. We just keep up with changes as they occur now, unless it's a really, necessary change, then we might go back and do a global search of things that are still published and try to update those. But after a while, things kind of fall off anyway and get refreshed. And so just keeping up with the language as it changes is important. Let's see what I have for examples here. Oh yeah, so you might have seen Latin X or Latin X, and you might have, first time you saw that, you probably thought, oh my gosh, is that a typo? What does that mean? Well, the Latina community used to use an A with a circle around it because the Romance languages are highly gendered languages, which doesn't sometimes match how society is now. And can you imagine if, for example, you're a Latino woman and you're so tired of always having to use the male gendered words, and the connotation that they have that the male is the mainstream or the superior version, but then it evolved into using an X instead of the A with the circle around it. And in Spanish, they pronounce it Latin X because X means X. And that is just to show a more inclusive version of the language. And I do not have any research as to how that is received. Oh gosh, I'm sorry about that. Zoom life. I don't have any research as to how that's actually being received by Spanish speakers. If anyone speaks Spanish here, you can definitely pitch in for how people view that. But I know in English, we're starting to say Latin X instead of Latino or Latina. For instance, we celebrate Latin X Heritage Month here at NC State in September and October. And the same for, you might see the word women with an X instead of an E. And the idea behind that is that, why does the word woman have to be a modification of the word man? Can it be its own word with its own spelling? Which I can see some people going, oh my gosh, that is so extreme. But little details translate out to wider perceptions. And so we have to open our minds to more inclusive ways of thinking about things. And you'll also see acronyms out there. BIPOC is a big one. It's right now, it means Black and Indigenous people of color. And the reason why BIPOC is prevalent now is because Black and Indigenous people have suffered amazingly similar harms in the history of the United States. With, some people would say genocide, slavery, just mass harms where there are lots of parallels amongst the history. And as a result, a lot of resulting inequities that affect those two groups very similarly. And so they're often referred to together. Let's see, words that have changed meanings over the years. Queer used to be negative, and now it's all about LGBTQ empowerment. It's kind of a informal term though, and if you're not within the community, I would be careful about using it. But if you read that and see it, it often has a positive connotation. And then I think I already talked about the capitalization of Black. And in our office, we often capitalize brown and white as well when referring to people. Any other examples out there?
I just have a question about using brown as maybe a catch-all term. I just
Yeah.
yeah.
That is a really good question. And I'm not going to make any assumptions about your own identity groups, but it's good you asked that, because if you are Asian or Latino or from the Indian subcontinent, or Caribbean, you may frequently refer to yourself as brown, um, and it's fine. But if you're not in those groups, definitely ask someone before using that. You will see that a lot, though, referred to within those communities, because a lot of times those communities feel an affinity with the Black community, and they call themselves Black and brown people proudly. But definitely, if you're not in those communities, use that with care and follow the lead of someone who's within those groups. So yeah, great thing to point out. Let's see, the last thing here that I have is cultural humility. And this is something I came across. Actually, Karen Bullock, who is a professor in our School of Social Work, has done a lot of research about this. And cultural humility is kind of one step further than cultural competence. And there's a whole research framework around this that kind of acknowledges there is absolutely no way that you can keep up with all the different identity groups that are out there and the intersectional ways that they cross paths with each other and are represented in individuals. So how can you prevent yourself from making mistakes? And the way to do that is to be culturally humble. And that starts with the assumption that you are going to make mistakes. You cannot understand everyone else's experience. You're constantly in a position of learning, and you will be aware of that, and that will help guide you. So those of you who are brave enough to ask questions today, you're showing cultural humility by asking those questions and wanting to do the right thing. And one way to talk about that is this other random picture I dropped in here, which was, I know we're heading up on time, but so I'll try to finish quickly. I was asked to participate in a diversity committee by University Communications last year, and they had actually 4 committees, diversity and 3 others that they thought were areas that need improvement at the university. And some of you may have actually participated in one or more of those committees too. And when it was justifying the fact that we needed a diversity communications committee, there was just one small paragraph that said, due to the fact that NC State's admission standards have risen, our Black student population has fallen. And I said, whoa, 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 what in the world? First of all, they didn't do their research. If they looked at the numbers, they would see that we are offering more Black students admission than ever before. They just aren't choosing to come here. And so the assumption that was made there was that, oh, they're not good enough to get in, which is a very dangerous assumption. The truth of the matter is the students that we want are choosing other institutions. So I think some cultural humility would have been very helpful there to not make that assumption in the first place. Just my personal experience I have. So how can you be culturally humble in your communications? You might include something like, we welcome your comments on our publications to help us embrace the diversity of our audiences. Let us know if we can do better. Or, please let us know if you have suggestions. This shows that you have the intention of being inclusive. You know you're not going to do everything right. Things are changing quickly, but you are committing to do this and to learn. So that is how I would recommend that people show cultural humility. If you want to read more about it, about its 3 components, and there's a great article that I include here. You make a commitment to self-evaluation, you commit to fixing power imbalances, and you partner with those who advocate for others. So my conclusion here is that we definitely have the power to shape perception, and as communicators, we can be catalysts for improving our organizations. Some of us may be introverts, we may be just sitting at our computer doing our work, but we have a lot of power, and we can either perpetuate wrongs or we can advance equity and inclusion. So don't underestimate the power that you have. Small choices can make a big impact, and we will help our institutions attract and retain people who seek environments where they are valued. And so I do have some other resources for you here. If you're a communicator, definitely read the NC State editorial style guidelines, voice and tone imagery, AP style book. We have a resource on our website, Speaking and Writing About Diversity. We have lots of great workshops. And then one of the articles, there are many great articles out there, but there's one that I included here that has some current terminology that's just very useful to have as a bookmark. So I know we're just about out of time, but I look forward to connecting with all of you. And definitely just give me a call or message if you have a question, and I'll try to find out the answer for you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? And can be now or later. I'm always around. And thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a really good session. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us, and a special thanks. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much. I am finalizing the 2021 CALS workshop schedule. And if there are topics you'd appreciate us covering, please email me, or better yet, complete the session feedback survey I'll send out with the recording along with the slides for this presentation. And to those of you who have attended multiple sessions this year, thank you so much for joining me on this journey to moving to a totally virtual platform from our roundups in the Jeter conference room. I appreciate you, and I hope that these have been helpful. To everyone, have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a healthy and peaceful holiday season. Thanks so much.
Thank you.